Mike Evans doesn't deserve just one episode lead in. He deserves two of them. Looking at the legend that is number 13. That and more on today's episode of Locked On Bucs.
You are Locked On Buccaneers, your daily Tampa Bay Buccaneers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, and welcome into this Tuesday episode of Locked On Bucs, your daily podcast covering the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And thanks so much for making Locked On Bucs your first listen of the day every day. Don't forget that you can subscribe for free on YouTube or wherever you're listening to this podcast. You can follow both of us on Twitter. Me, I'm David Harrison, on Twitter, dharrison82, hosting this episode, credential member of the media, covering your Buccaneers for BucsGameDay.com, a part of Sports Illustrated's Fan Nation. You can find my partner in crime, James Yarcho, at JYarcho_Bucs. He is the deputy editor of SB Nation's BucsNation.com, another credential member of the media. Both of us are here Monday through Friday, along with our everydayers. And as always, everydayers, we want to thank you for your continued support of the show. Today's episode brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create your account, use the promo code LOCKEDONNFL to get $20 off your first purchase on last-minute tickets. Lowest price guaranteed. On today's episode of Locked On Bucs, Buccaneers could have some competition for a top coaching candidate, and I'm trashing and stashing some things that we saw on Sunday in the win over the Carolina Panthers. But first, got to say hi to Richard, Alexander, Chris, and Stan Antogato. I hope I said that correctly in the live chat. Thank you for joining me live. Thank you to all of you for joining me whenever you're joining me. We got to talk about Mike Evans because Mike Evans is a legend. He has already cemented that status, to be quite honest with you, but he further cemented that status Sunday by securing his 10th straight 1,000-yard receiving season for his to start his NFL career. The only receiver to ever do that, joined Jerry Rice as only the second NFL receiver to ever have 10 in a row. And now next season, Mike Evans will be shooting for 11, which would tie Jerry Rice's record. And then, next season we'll just make it 12, and we'll call it, what it is. Mike Evans is a legend. He's a Bucs legend. He's an NFL legend, and he's an all-time great. But where does he stack up right now compared to all of the all-time greats? Well, good friend Carmen Vitale of the show, former Tampa Bay Buccaneers staff writer, current Fox Sports NFC North reporter, retweeted the Tampa Bay Buccaneers social media video of Mike Evans watching the play where he earned his 10th straight 1,000-yard season to start an NFL career on Sunday, and added in her retweet, quote, "Mike ain't going anywhere, and there will be a gold jacket waiting for him at the end," end quote. Well, of course, every Bucs fan, most Bucs fans, if you're a Bucs fan, you should be hoping that, of course, her prediction is true and that Mike Evans is legitimately not going anywhere at the end of the season. Of course, we've covered and talked about every day, as you already know, our opinion on the contract disputes and all of those things. And there certainly is a gold jacket waiting for Mike Evans at the end of his career whenever he decides to hang it up. But when could that come? I've got a little bit of, I don't want to say prediction, but I've got some numbers that we're going to go over here and where he could stand by the end of his illustrious NFL career. So where does Mike Evans stand all-time among the all-time greats? That's really what we're looking for here. Right now, Mike Evans has 149 games played in his NFL career, and he currently stands 31st all-time in yards receiving with 11,437. So think about the history of the National Football League, the history of the NFL. I mean, there are, 6 minimum, you figure, active receivers on every NFL roster. 6 times 32, that's a lot of numbers. And you think about Mike Evans over the years, you've got no more than 30 receivers, no more than 30 human beings that have ever walked the planet Earth have caught footballs for more yards than you have already. And you still got time to go, man. Only Calvin Johnson and Antonio Brown have finished their careers with more yards and fewer games. So Calvin Johnson, obviously a Hall of Famer. Antonio Brown, Antonio Brown is doing Antonio Brown things. Certainly a talent on the field when he was on there and not jacking off of it. But obviously everybody is chasing who? They're chasing Jerry Rice, right? If you look at the thumbnail, you got Calvin Johnson on there. Obviously that's the next target for Mike Evans to take down, but you also got Jerry Rice on there because that's the GOAT. That's the guy that everybody's trying to beat. And currently Mike Evans astoundingly. So Mike Evans has 11,437 yards. He trails Jerry Rice by 11,458 yards. So Mike Evans hasn't even reached the turnaround point. If this is like a 2-mile run, Mike Evans hasn't even hit the 1 mile mark yet of what Jerry Rice did. So if you didn't grow up getting to watch Jerry Rice, kind of gives you an example of just how great Jerry Rice was and how much fun it was to watch him. I'm fortunate that I was old enough to remember watching Jerry Rice play football. But 11,458 yards to catch Jerry Rice, which is just under all of the yards that Calvin Johnson had in his entire career. So when you look at it, right, Calvin Johnson, Hall of Famer, didn't win a Super Bowl. I don't know if he really ever played in the playoffs. That was during the stretch where the Detroit Lions weren't ever very good. But Mike Evans, obviously his resume is already more than what Calvin Johnson has been able to do in totality. Not quite there on yards, but he'll get there on yards. So I think you can pretty safely say Mike Evans, Hall of Fame. If you want to go ahead and start planning your trip to Canton whenever his time comes, you can go ahead and do so. In targets, Mike Evans is the 32nd all-time receiver in targets. He's currently got 1,288. He is currently 40th all-time in receptions with 744 and 9th in NFL history with 91 receiving touchdowns. He only needs 9 more touchdowns receiving to be the 9th receiver in NFL history to hit 100 of them. And he's 19th in first down receptions, which is not a very commonly discussed stat, but it's a pretty good one. And Mike Evans, top 20 in NFL history already, showing just how valuable he has been to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Now, the player with the most games played ahead of Mike Evans so far on the all-time list is Jerry Rice, who played 303 of them. In theory, if he can stay healthy and modern medicine and training helps Evans play that many games, 303 games, then Mike is basically halfway through his career right now. Like if you watch Mike Evans throughout his entire career, if he plays as many games as Jerry Rice did, Mike Evans is about halfway through his career. He's played 149. He needs another 154 to match Jerry Rice. So think about how much more fun you might be getting to see out of Mike Evans. When we talk about the Michael Jordan versus LeBron James conversation, right? Everybody talks about LeBron James and all this other stuff. And we talk about the athleticism and the advances in science, diet, medical treatment, all this stuff, and why it extends players' careers now versus when it did, or what it did in Michael Jordan's era. Well, Jerry Rice, kind of a similar type of era of NFL. Mike Evans, similar type of era of NFL as well. So maybe we can see Mike Evans hit that number. And just thinking that you're going to see more Mike Evans games than you've already seen, it's kind of astounding when you really think about it. If Evans continues his career averages for another 154 games, which again is kind of hard to predict. You know, Jerry Rice wasn't exactly hitting his career averages at the end there when he's playing for the Broncos and some other teams. But if he does, Mike Evans will finish with 1,512 receptions, 23,257 yards, and 185 touchdowns. And with the 17th game added into all of these seasons, what he's going to need is 8 more seasons plus 13 games after this regular season. If he does that, and this is where things get interesting, because you might be sitting here thinking like, bro, like 303 games, thinking about how many he's already played, thinking that he's going to play even more is a little bit outlandish. If he hits those numbers, he will, if he plays 13 more games plus 8 more seasons, and remember, there's 5 games left this season already, he will hit 303 games played, if he can stay healthy, by the age of, or when he's the age of 38 years old, which is old in the NFL, but it ain't as old as we've seen a lot of people play already. And he would set the games played by a receiver record with 304 of them in week 14 of the 2032 NFL season. So get your season ticket secured now. Those numbers, by the way, have Evans on pace to finish his career second in receptions by 47 of them, number 1 in yards, second in touchdowns by 12. So yeah, Mike Evans obviously having a legendary career. The Bucs better pay this dude. You cannot let this dude get out of the building. So that is my segment 1 for this episode. Again, I know James went heavy on Mike Evans yesterday. I'm going heavy on Mike Evans today in my way. He went in on his way because Mike Evans deserves 2 openings. Like bottom line is Mike Evans deserves to be the focal point of 2 episodes. He deserves more, but we do have other stuff to talk about. Continuing on today's episode, we're going to stash and trash some things as we do every single week, and that is coming up next on today's episode of Locked On Bucs, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And we're doing that thanks to our friends over at Game Time. You shouldn't have to worry when you're buying tickets to your next big event. Game Time is the fast and easy way to buy tickets for all your sports, music, comedy, and theater near you. With killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seats, and their best price guarantee, Game Time takes the guesswork out of buying tickets. Last-minute tickets, flash deals, zone deals, all of the deals available at Game Time. It's easy to find and buy tickets for every kind of event in your area. And Game Time is the only ticketing app that gives you complete peace of mind with your purchase. They're obsessed with finding ways to help you save money on tickets, and Game Time has deals on tickets right up to the start of the event. They even have deals up to an hour after the event starts in some cases. It's the place for you to find last-minute seats. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use the promo code LOCKEDONNFL to get $20 off your first purchase. Terms do apply. Again, create your account, redeem the code LOCKEDONNFL to get $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last-minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Continuing on today's episode of Locked On Bucs. Thanks for making Locked On Bucs first listen or first view today and every day. Every dayers. Come back tomorrow. James will be back with Evan Klosky. WTSP Wednesday is always a good time, always a fun time. Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top stories of the day with local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every single league. Go to Locked On Sports Today on YouTube and subscribe to the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel. Let's check back in on the live chat here. Danny has jumped in as well. Christopher, good to see you. Robert as well. And Zach, Christian, all of you, again, greatly appreciate all of you for jumping into the live chat during the live stream here on a Tuesday morning. For those of you listening or watching after the live stream is over, we still appreciate you just as much. And every day, as you already know, we appreciate you all the ways. As far as we can appreciate everybody, it's Appreciation Tuesday here, Taco Tuesday and Appreciation Tuesday going down here at Locked On Bucs. We're going to stash and trash some things. So I'm going to stash something I appreciate. We're going to trash something I don't appreciate, to be quite honest with you. And I don't think Mike Evans is going to appreciate it as much. He appreciates part of it, but he's not going to appreciate the whole thing. We'll get to that here in just a second. I'm going to stash Rashad White's getting rights. And yes, I did intend for that to rhyme. Hat tip to Eminem joining Fortnite. If Eminem can be in Fortnite, I can drop a little bit of rhyming here on Locked On Bucs. So far, well, not so far. In the last 2 weeks, Rashad White has rushed for 184 combined yards. And like I said, in the last 2 weeks, 35 carries to do so. That's 5.3 yards per carry, which is an absolutely amazing number when you think about the Buccaneers rushing attack, right? He's also added 5 catches for 32 yards in the past couple of weeks. So those numbers have Rashad White just in the last 2 weeks alone. Again, third in rushing in the past 2 weeks behind Kyren Williams of the Los Angeles Rams and Christian McCaffrey of the San Francisco 49ers. He's got 5 carries that have gained 10 or more yards, which 10 or more yards in the NFL for rushing is an explosive play. So 5 explosive plays. That is the third most in the National Football League over the last 2 weeks. He's got 2 carries of over 15 plus yards, which PFF calls breakaway runs. Fair enough. That's tied for 5th in the league. So those numbers tell you nobody is running the ball as well as Rashad White, except for, again, guys like Kyren Williams and Christian McCaffrey overall. White is running hard. He's at the 4th most rushing yards after contact among backs with at least 20 carries over the last 2 weeks, which is an average of 10 carries per game. So it's really not that much, but didn't want to give, the one guy who broke 1 tackle and ran for 40 yards, all the clout there. You need some consistency and performance. And the most important thing, or the most impressive thing here, is that his best work is coming in key situations. In the last 2 weeks, he's had a touchdown from 1 yard out, which we, again, watching the Buccaneers play recent, years and games this season, a touchdown from 1 yard out on the ground, not exactly a gimme. So that's important to get. He's had a 20-yard catch to end the third quarter against the Carolina in Panthers territory when they needed a score to make it a 2-score game, trying to salt that game away. And, of course, you got a 30-yard run where he wisely gets down to end the game instead of being greedy and gaining the other 18 yards he needed to have back-to-back 100-yard rushing games for the first time in his career. I mean, that's selfless football at its finest and a prime example of a man who is out there playing for his team, not for himself, which is exactly what you want in a young player especially, but especially a running back, a ball carrier. The best part is they've done it with their zone rushing attack and they've done it with their gap rushing attack. 19 carries have come in zone rush. Looks 16 of them have come in gap runs, but White and the Bucs rushing attack is getting both of them done in both looks. So that's incredibly important because it gives them flexibility going down the schedule. So feel out an opponent and say, is our zone game working? Is our gap game working? What's working the best? What do we need to continue to exploit? And that gives them the opportunity to do so. So the fact that they are doing this across the board, they're running at clips They haven't before. Now, look, I get it. Like the Indianapolis Colts, Carolina Panthers defense is actually better than I think a lot of people realize. But, they're not exactly the world beaters. Not talking about like the San Francisco 49ers here, but it doesn't matter. Any type of production, we've seen the Buccaneers have much less production against much weaker defenses. So any type of production is positive production here for Rashad White and the Buccaneers rushing attack. That is my stash. My trash here, this is where I'm talking about Mike Evans here. Making Mike Evans carry all the water without paying the man. Look, in week 13 specifically, no other receiver had a PFF grade over 67. I know PFF grades are a little bit wonky and all that stuff, but Mike Evans' PFF grade was 90.2. That is a huge discrepancy. So even if you don't think the PFF grades of 67 or lower for the rest of the Buccaneers wide receivers is completely fair, I highly doubt you have a 20-point difference, so their 67 would be your 87. You know what I'm saying? So it's still a very big disparity between Mike Evans and the next guy on this roster. For the season, Mike Evans is the 13th highest graded wide receiver with an 84.5 overall grade, the 12th highest grade in receiving alone with an 86 overall grade. Chris Godwin is 35th, and he has a 74.2 overall receiving grade. And I love me some Chris Godwin, but even that is a huge space that you don't want to have between your top two receivers when you're supposed to have arguably the top the top receiving duo in the National Football League. After Mike Evans and Chris Godwin, after those two guys, the next receiver up for receiving grade from the Buccaneers right now on PFF is Raheem Jarrett, the undrafted receiver out of Maryland with a 58.4. He's ranked 125th. So you got Mike Evans receiving grade ranked 12th in the NFL. Chris Godwin's ranked 35th. That's a wide margin you don't want, but 35th isn't terrible. And then 35th to 125th overall. There are 90 receivers between Chris Godwin and the third highest graded Buccaneers receiver. Now, some of that is execution, some of that is scheme, and some of that is situational play call. Baker Mayfield certainly doesn't help all of those situations. Meanwhile, Evans has the 18th ranked average annual value of his contract, and that's where we're going to get into this. The Bucs declined to reportedly even come to the table to talk to Mike Evans' agents about an extension in the offseason. He wanted one. He publicly said he wanted one, and the reports are the Buccaneers never even came to the table. Your legendary Hall of Fame wide receiver, arguably the best player to ever suit up for your franchise, easily the best offensive player to ever suit up for your franchise, but arguably the best player to ever suit up for your franchise, says, I want to commit to you long-term, and you don't even come to the table. If that's true, that's absolutely ridiculous, and this season is showing you why that was ridiculous in the first place. Only five of these 17 receivers that have higher annual average values in their contracts currently have more receptions than Mike Evans. The lowest annual average value being paid to one of those receivers that's above Mike Evans' annual average value is DJ Moore, who's averaging $20.6 million per year on his contract, while Mike Evans is comparing is averaging $16.5 million. That is a $4.1 million difference that the Chicago Bears are paying on average to DJ Moore than the Buccaneers are paying to Mike Evans, a franchise and NFL legend. It's absolutely ridiculous. The highest annual average value for a receiver with fewer catches is Cooper Kupp, who's averaging $26.7 million while bringing in 33 passes in the season. That's a difference of $10.2 million average annual value and 28 catches. So for those who want to do the math at home, Cooper Kupp right now is getting paid an average of $809,000 per reception. Mike Evans is making $270,491. That is a massive discrepancy. And before you say, yeah, but Cooper Kupp's been injured, he hasn't been playing as much, that's a part of this. Availability is the most important ability. So I'm not giving Cooper Kupp any pass, and this isn't Cooper Kupp's fault anyway, but I'm not giving any passes for the fact that Cooper Kupp has been injured while getting paid $809,000 per catch so far this season. So the Buccaneers are going to need to open that checkbook up. Like, bottom line is, Brady replacement strategy was flawed, and to a certain extent, we kind of saw this coming, right? Cap management is terrible. All of this stuff. Todd Bowles certainly has his detractors. All of these other things, all of those other things going wrong. That's just kind of natural course of business. But if you let Mike Evans walk out the door without paying this man, that is a franchise fumbling the bag more than any other franchise potentially in the history of the National Football League. So the Buccaneers are going to need to open the paycheck. His next contract, Mike Evans' next contract, and obviously we're going to get even more talks about this as the offseason gets closer and we get into it, is going to need to average about $25 million average annual value. Spot Track puts Mike Evans' annual average value right now at about $23.5 million. So you give him the $23.5, and then you give him $1.5 million per year as a "we're sorry" bonus for not doing this sooner. So that's my trash. My trash is that Mike Evans is not only the best player you've had in your franchise history, best offensive player you've had in your franchise history, but he's also by far and away this season, again, whether it's due to ability, scheme, quarterback consistency and chemistry, he is far and away carrying your team. If Mike Evans is not on this team, I don't even want to tell you what this record the win-loss record for this team might be this season. That is how big of an impact he's making. Pay the man. Again, 23.5 is his spot track evaluation. Give him that plus $1.5 million because you messed up and didn't re-sign him before the season. Wrapping up this conversation today with the revelation that if the Buccaneers do move on from Todd Bowles this offseason, they may have an in-division competition for one of the hottest coaching names in the upcoming coaching carousel. That's coming up next on today's episode of Locked On Bucs, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And we're going to do that thanks to our friends over at Jace Medical. I know we come to sports to escape from some of the craziness that real life brings to you, but we need to take a minute, keep it inside real life, because Jace Medical wants to tell you that according to the FDA, pharmacies are running out of antibiotics like amoxicillin right in the middle of the worst flu season in over a decade. And nothing is worse than getting sick and not being able to get what you need because of something as silly as supply chain issues. With Jace Medical, you can get some of that worry out of the way and be prepared if the need arises. The Jace case is a pack of 5 different antibiotics to treat a long list of bacterial illnesses, including UTIs, respiratory infections, and more. Getting sick happens to everybody, and now you can be readily prepared for a whole host of afflictions. Visit jacemedical.com, complete your physician encounter. It'll be reviewed by a board-certified physician, and your medications will be dispensed by a licensed pharmacy at a fraction of the regular cost. Go to jacemedical.com. Use the promo code Locked On to get $20 off your order. Again, that offer code Locked On to get $20 off your order at jacemedical.com. Wrapping up today's episode of Locked On Bucs, we're talking about Todd in a way. We're not talking about Todd Bowles and his press conferences, but talking about the topic of if the Buccaneers move on from Todd Bowles. And every day, as you already know, we've had several conversations about this. I know a lot of Buccaneers fans have their opinions, and everybody's entitled to theirs, of course. But if the Buccaneers decide to move on from Todd Bowles this offseason, Ben Johnson, the offensive coordinator of the Detroit Lions, is one of the hottest names expected to be pursued this offseason by the Buccaneers, by the Raiders, by the Panthers. And that is where this conversation is going, because the NFC South competition may heat up for a guy like this if the Buccaneers want to go after him. The Glazers may have to be more aggressive than I think we're used to seeing them in this type of a situation. According to The Athletic's Diana Rossini, she is reporting, quote, "The expectation in the Panthers building is Tepper will try to lure Lions offensive coordinator Ben Johnson to Carolina after trying to hire him last season. Johnson decided to stay in Detroit last hiring cycle, but a league source told me Johnson is ready for a head coaching job now," end quote. So David Tepper, if you can say one thing about David Tepper, the owner of the Carolina Panthers, he's certainly aggressive and he's certainly willing to make big moves. Trading Christian McCaffrey last season, trading DJ Moore in a package to move up for the number 1 overall pick to trade or to draft Bryce Young, bringing in Frank Wright, who has Super Bowl, experience as a player, as a coach, and all these things. And then, oh, by the way, firing Frank Wright for not making Bryce Young better than CJ Stroud. So the epitome of worrying about what other people are doing instead of worrying about what you're doing is basically what got to David Tepper. But it all points to an owner that is super, super aggressive. So if he's got his eye on a coach like Ben Johnson, which again, according to Rossini, they went after him, tried to hire him last year before they went and tried to hire Frank Wright, then obviously that makes a lot of sense. So if the Buccaneers are also looking for a coach, typically ownership, they like to kind of flip-flop, go from offensive coach to defensive coach. Well, Ben Johnson is an offensive-minded coach. So if they move on from Todd Bowles and you look at franchise history, your best years in franchise history both came under offensive head coaches. Today's NFL, there's all kinds of stats and analytics that say that offensive-minded head coaches have more success in today's NFL. And certainly you could see the Bucs and the Panthers fighting each other, not just for wins and losses in the win-loss column, but also for a potential head coach. Rossini continued, quote, "Some in the Panthers organization, per a league source, have been texting Johnson about how complicated it has been to work in Carolina this season. Johnson is expected to be the top coaching candidate in 2024, end quote. So that's very interesting because, when you got options and Ben Johnson is projected to have options, you typically want to take a job that's a little bit better suited to be successful, right? And the Carolina Panthers, not only do they have a very complicated workspace environment, but they also have a lack of a first-round pick coming up in 2024, which looks like it's probably going to be the number 1 overall pick, so that's even better. Rossini speculated that the Panthers may have to pay Ben Johnson kind of the second contract for a coach type of money in order to get him. So you're going to pay a brand new head coach, second coach type of money. So that'll be interesting. And something to pay attention to as well. Rossini also pointed out that current Carolina interim head coach Ejiro Evero, the defensive coordinator, who is now the interim head coach, was not asked or approached by David Tepper before being named the interim head coach. David Tepper just said, "You're going to be my interim head coach." Didn't even talk to him about it, which is interesting because last year Evero was offered the interim head coach title in Denver after they fired Nathaniel Hackett, but he turned it down because he didn't feel like it was a good situation for him to get his first head coach exposure. But here he is now a year later, whether he likes it or not, getting head coach exposure as the interim head coach of the Carolina Panthers. Just kind of adds to that impression that working for David Tepper might be one of the worst jobs in the NFL, especially, again, when you don't have a good roster outside of Bryce Young and Brian Burns, and you have no first-round pick. So it's going to be really hard. And you got an owner who obviously basically will give you less than 11 games to get this thing right, or else you might get canned. So I don't know, man. If you're looking at head coaching jobs across the National Football League and you're Ben Johnson and you have options, I would chase the situation and not necessarily chase the biggest paycheck. But that is just me. We'll see what Ben decides to do in the offseason. Again, thank you everybody who's joining me live here. I see Gary, I see Jay Jones coming through as well. There's a lot more to talk about, but again, wanted to drop a little bit more love for Mike Evans, not only in the first segment, but also kind of in the second segment in my Trash It part of it. Rashad White's been balling out, and of course, a little bit of an eye on the future of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers organization. So a little bit of a mixed bag here today on Locked On Bucs, but I appreciate you all for coming through, whether you're live, whether you're listening or watching later. I appreciate all of you. Coming up tomorrow, James will be back with Ed McCloskey of WTSP 10 Tampa Bay for WTSP Wednesday. If you got questions, leave them in the live chat, leave them in the YouTube comment section, or find us on Twitter at @JRCO_Bucs, at DHarrison82, or become a Locked On Bucs insider. Join subtext.com/LockedOnBucs, and you can go one-on-one with my buddy, your pal, James Yarcho. Good stuff going on over there. I'm sure a little bit of hockey dad stuff going on as well. I'm not only a spokesperson, I am a subscriber. Until we speak again, please, if you're out and about, be safe, be kind, fire the cannons. We'll see you back here for another episode of Locked On Bucs, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.